Most people saw the clip and scrolled past it. Nobody stopped to ask why Karoline Leavitt never answered the question. Karoline Leavitt walks into every room the same way, with the quiet confidence of someone who has rehearsed the ending. She controls press briefings the way a conductor controls an orchestra. The tempo, the volume, the silence between notes, that is her signature. That is her armor. But inside the chamber hearing room on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring, with the fluorescent lights pushed 2 stops too bright by a production crew who had been warned something unusual might happen, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was already seated. She wasn't flipping through notes. She wasn't checking her phone. She was watching the door, waiting. The way a surgeon waits for a procedure she has already rehearsed 100 times in her mind. The air in the room had a particular quality that the C-SPAN crew noticed before the cameras rolled. Not tense, exactly, but compressed, like the pressure before a weather system changes. A floor director standing near the far wall had her headset on, but wasn't speaking into it. She was just listening. One of the senior camera operators, a man who had covered 17 consecutive congressional hearings, adjusted his lens for the 3rd time in 4 minutes and said nothing to the colleague beside him. They both knew. Leavitt entered at 2:17 p.m. Her blue blazer was pressed, her posture was exact, her smile was the kind that doesn't move the muscles around the eyes. She acknowledged the room with a measured nod. Not warm, not cold, but calibrated. She settled into her chair with the practiced ease of someone who has never once needed a moment to collect herself. Her hands came to rest on the table, flat and still. She crossed one ankle behind the other beneath the chair. She was ready. She had been ready for rooms like this her entire career. Crockett let her finish settling. That pause, 3 full seconds of silence after Leavitt sat down, was not accidental. A woman in the second row of gallery seats later said it felt like watching someone place a trap without the other person noticing the click. The hearing opened with procedural formalities. Leavitt answered the first 4 questions the way she answers every question. Sharp, fast, confident, closing the door on each one before the next could open. She controlled the pace. She controlled the framing. She smiled twice, both times at exactly the right moments, and the room seemed to relax around her. Crockett had not asked a single question yet. She had been watching, letting the room warm itself on Leavitt's performance, letting the confidence build to its fullest height. A congressional aide seated behind Crockett later recalled that the Congresswoman hadn't touched her water glass, hadn't uncapped her pen, hadn't shifted in her seat once since Leavitt entered. When her turn came, the room didn't feel like it changed. There was no dramatic pause, no clearing of throats, no visible signal that anything was different. Crockett simply leaned forward slightly, adjusted the microphone 1 inch closer to her mouth, and looked at Leavitt the way a person looks at a document they've already read 3 times and understand completely. Then she began to speak. It was not what she said in the first 30 seconds. It was what she didn't say. She didn't challenge Leavitt's earlier answers. She didn't cite contradictions. She didn't raise her voice. She simply described a morning, a specific morning, February 11th, a specific address in a specific district, a specific family that had been waiting for a specific response from a specific office, Leavitt's office. The details were granular and delivered without emotion, the way a forensic accountant reads line items: street address, date of request, date of first non-response, date of second non-response, name of the child involved, age of the child. Leavitt's jaw was still. Her expression was still. But her right hand, which had been flat on the table when the hearing began, was no longer flat. The fingers had curled slightly. Crockett continued. She moved to a second morning. March 3rd. A different family, a different district, a different request to a different department, but the same office. The same non-response pattern. The same timeline of silence. She described what that silence had cost in specific, measurable terms, not rhetorically, not with outrage, with the calm precision of someone doing what she had called, in a previous hearing, not accusation, but archaeology, laying bare what is buried. She said the word once, quietly, almost incidentally, the way a geologist names a formation, and the gallery didn't react visibly, but 2 journalists at the press table wrote it down. Leavitt opened her mouth to respond. Crockett hadn't asked a question yet. She was still building. She moved to a 3rd case, then a 4th, each one connected to the previous by the same thread. Not policy failure in the abstract, but documented non-response from a specific office to a specific human need with a specific name attached. The room was no longer relaxed. A woman in the 4th row had stopped writing on her notepad entirely. A man near the aisle had his chin resting in one hand and his eyes locked on the table in front of him, not on either woman, as if looking at either one directly would require something he hadn't prepared for. Then Crockett reached under the table. She placed a folder on the surface between them. Not with drama, the way a teacher places an assignment back on a student's desk. Clean, final. She opened it to a specific page. Not the first page, not the last, but a middle page marked with a single paperclip. And she slid it 4 inches across the table toward Leavitt without touching it again. A printed record. Official letterhead. A date stamp. A reference number. Leavitt's breathing was still controlled, but her posture had shifted, fractionally invisibly to anyone not watching closely. Backward, not leaning away, just no longer leaning forward. Crockett looked at it once, then looked at Leavitt, then asked her first question. It took 11 seconds to ask. Not because it was complicated, because it was simple. And it is the kind of simplicity that takes 11 seconds to deliver because every word in it carries weight, and putting them in order correctly is not a performance. It is a precision instrument. The question named the specific document on the table. It named the date on the document. It named the office listed at the top of the document. And then it asked, in plain language, not accusatory, not theatrical, in the flattest possible register, why the response that was required by statute on that date had not been sent. Not why the policy had failed. Not why the system had broken down. Why this specific response, required by a specific law to a specific family, had not been sent. The room went dead silent. Not the silence of a pause between statements, the silence of a stopped clock. A camera operator near the east wall later said she kept filming for 6 seconds after the question ended, purely because stopping felt wrong, as though lifting her eye from the viewfinder would break something she couldn't name. The floor director's headset had slipped to one side. She hadn't adjusted it. Leavitt's lips parted slightly. Her eyes moved, just once, briefly, to the document on the table, then back to Crockett. Her right hand was now fully closed, fingers folded inward against her palm. Her breathing was visible. Not ragged, not panicked, but visible. The chest rising in a way it hadn't been rising 3 minutes ago. She began to speak. 3 words came out, then stopped. She started again, this time with a different construction. A framing device, a contextual reorientation, the professional reflex of someone who knows that when the direct answer is dangerous, you build a room around it first. Crockett waited, not impatiently, not with visible anticipation, just waited, the way the document was waiting on the table between them. The framing device expanded. It mentioned broader policy architecture. It noted systemic considerations. It moved in the direction of explanation without arriving at one. And then, in the middle of a sentence, between one clause and the next, Leavitt stopped. Her voice didn't crack. It didn't waver. It simply stopped, as if the sentence had reached the edge of something she could not step past, and she knew it, and the knowing of it arrived in public, in front of cameras, in front of a room that had stopped breathing. Crockett let the silence sit for 3 full seconds. Then she said one more thing, 6 words. Her voice had dropped lower, not higher. Not the volume of escalation, but the register of something already decided. She used the word archaeology for the second time, and this time it didn't sound incidental. It sounded like a verdict. She said, "The archaeology doesn't lie, Ms. Leavitt." And she folded the document closed, uncapped her pen for the first time since the hearing began, and returned to her notes. She never raised her voice. She never smiled. She never looked at the gallery to gauge their reaction. She had come to do one thing, and the one thing was done. A man in the 5th row pressed his hand flat over his mouth. A young woman beside him stared straight ahead, unblinking. Near the gallery entrance, a congressional aide who had been standing against the wall since the hearing opened slowly sat down on the floor. Not dramatically, not collapsing, but carefully, the way a person sits when their legs have decided before their mind has, and put his back against the wall. The cameras rolled. Leavitt's jaw worked once, side to side, tight, locked, then stopped. Her left hand came up from the table and pressed briefly against her sternum, then returned to the surface. Her eyes had gone still, not calm, still. The way water goes still before it freezes, not peaceful, but fixed. She sweat slightly at the hairline, a thin line that the harsh overhead lights caught, and the cameras almost certainly caught too. Her voice, when it came back, was lower than it had been, not in register, but in weight, as if the air beneath it had been removed. She said the question was based on incomplete information. She said the document lacked context. She said the record would reflect the full picture. Each statement landed shorter than the one before it, like a structure losing floors. The audience absorbed every word in silence. Nobody murmured. Nobody shifted. One woman in the third row had both hands in her lap, fingers interlocked, pressing against each other with a force she almost certainly wasn't aware of. Crockett looked up from her notes. She asked quietly, "What context would you like to add right now?" Leavitt opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. What came out was not an answer. It was the architecture of an answer, the framing, the premise, the approach to the room where the answer lived, but not the answer itself. And the room recognized the difference, not with noise, with stillness. The deep, specific stillness of people who have just understood something they cannot unhear. By the time the gavel fell to end that session, the footage was already moving. Not yet viral, just moving. One clip, 32 seconds, beginning at the moment Crockett placed the folder on the table and ending at the moment Leavitt's voice stopped mid-sentence. Within 11 minutes of the hearing's close, it had been posted on 4 separate platforms. Within 30 minutes, it had been segmented into 9 independent pieces, each one spreading at a different speed, reaching a different audience, landing with a different weight. A producer at a cable network later described the speed of it as watching a slow fire suddenly find oxygen. The news cycle found it before midnight. Anchors replayed the clip in full, the whole 11 seconds of silence after the question, and let it sit without commentary for entire segments. One anchor used the word Crockett had used, archaeology, in her own framing and then paused, as if realizing she'd borrowed it. The word trended on its own by 1 a.m., separate from both women's names, as if the language itself had become the story. Trump's White House put out a statement that evening describing the hearing as a political ambush. The statement was longer than it needed to be. Capital letters appeared in sentences where they had no grammatical purpose. Each paragraph ended with more certainty than the paragraph before it, the way someone writes when they are trying to convince themselves as much as anyone reading. By the following morning, the statement had been posted beside the clip 17,000 times with no caption, just the juxtaposition. Backstage after the gavel, the C-SPAN floor director found her team standing in 2 loose clusters on opposite sides of the room, not speaking to each other, not reviewing footage, just standing. She described it later as the atmosphere of a place where something heavy had passed through and hadn't finished passing yet. Leavitt's aide was typing rapidly on a phone with autocorrect producing 3 uncorrected errors in a single message. The aide didn't stop to fix them. In the hallway outside the chamber, 3 people who had been in the gallery were standing together, but not talking. One of them was holding a water bottle by the neck without drinking from it. Another was staring at the middle distance with a look that a journalist nearby described not as shock, but as recalibration. The particular expression of a person reorganizing something they thought they understood. The forums found the hearing transcript by morning. They cross-referenced the document in the folder with public records, statutory filing deadlines, previous press briefings, and 2 years of non-response patterns in other districts. The cross-referencing produced more questions than answers. The official counter-evidence didn't arrive. The clarifying statements never clarified. The full context that Leavitt had referenced remained. In the weeks that followed, a thing that had been promised but not produced. People who had never followed a congressional hearing in their lives were watching the 32-second clip on loop and sharing it with the caption, "Did this just happen?" The answer, of course, was yes. It happened in a room with cameras, in front of an audience, in real time. The question that Crockett asked, the 11-second question that started all of it, became the kind of thing that doesn't leave. Not because it was spectacular, because it was specific. Because specificity, delivered calmly to the right person in the right room with the right document already on the table, is not a performance. It is the one thing that performance cannot survive. Power built on noise has a weakness. It can only hold as long as nobody asks the one quiet, specific, documented question it was never prepared to answer. Jasmine Crockett asked it. The room went silent. And that silence said everything that Karoline Leavitt did not. If you've never seen what accountability actually looks like when it's done without theatrics, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. The next confrontation is already building. And once you see what's coming, you'll understand why silence is always louder than power.